This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Stacy Krembaker, and I'll be moderating our conversation with the panelists joining us today. Before we slip into dialogue, I want to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. And while we convene virtually, I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish people, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people. Please take a moment to consider the importance of the land we work, live, and play on, and the Indigenous communities that have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Thank you. As I mentioned in opening, I'm Stacy, and I serve on the International Board of Directors for IIDA and practice with Malum Architects in Seattle, Washington, where I'm lucky to be part of a design community that really advocates for centering sustainability in our processes and outcomes. Joining our discussion are sustainability champions that are actively shaping the interior design community today. We have Giulio Bonazzi, who is a CEO with Aquafil, our partner in bringing this conversation to you all. We have with us Megumi Hironaka, Associate Principal and Sustainable Design Leader at IIDA. We have Joey Shea, Manager of Mission Activation with Interface. And we have Lisa Adams, Director of Citizen HKS and Sustainable Design Leader Principal at HKS. We're super excited to welcome you all here today. You know, as we were preparing for our panel, we've continued to cycle back to how we can make championing sustainability more accessible to all of us and practitioners, whether we are making products or making spaces, and to really break down what is technical and mysterious and daunting that can be overwhelming sometimes when we start to think about sustainability. We're going to start broad with our panel today as we start to think about kind of reflecting on each of your varied perspectives and areas of impact within design industry. I'd like to ask each of you, what does sustainability really mean to you? And kind of where does your passion for working in this space stem from? And maybe I'm going to cue it off to Joey to get us started today, and then we'll follow through the other panelists.
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, IIDA, for hosting. I'm glad to be part of this. I'm excited. There have been periods in my life where I've heard this question so much that I get tired of it, but it's been a while, so I'm actually really excited to hear what people are saying now. I kind of fundamentally think that true sustainability needs to be built around the concepts of longevity and justice. So I don't think that something can be considered sustainable if it isn't going to last as indefinitely as possible. And I don't think something can last indefinitely if it is kind of built on an inequitable situation or unequal participation. So I think about ecosystems where certainly not everybody is happy and healthy all the time, right? And not all living creatures and beings in that system are necessarily thriving, but the sustainability of the system persists because everything is participating and everything is kept in check by the system itself. And so when I apply that to the kind of human, systems or human scale, it is easy to use that UN definition, meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future, right? And it's true. But I kind of add that element of equity, especially social equity, to say that durable solutions cannot exist if they are founded on, again, unequal participation or unequal benefit. So that's how I think about sustainability, and that means that circularity and low impact material and the kind of creative application of all of our skills and talents is all a necessary part of those systems. And then my personal story about how I kind of got into it is I grew up in one of those households that had antibiotic, hormone free, organic, free range, low on the food chain for a long time, buying from local co-ops, and had one of those wonderful mothers who kind of instilled a lot of that ethic in me from really early on. But I actually identified pretty early on that I thought the environmental movement did a really poor job of getting people on board, by trying to give a little bit too much fact and science and data and figure, and not nearly enough kind of inspiration and invitation. And so have kind of shaped my career and my education around trying to be able to make the case for the kind of social benefits, the quality of life benefits, the human impact of a more sustainable future and more sustainable solutions. So glad to be on a panel like this where we can discuss that in the context of the built space, and very lucky to be at an organization that I feel like gives me the opportunity to talk about that, pretty much every day.
Thanks, Joey. Maybe next we'll cue it over to Lisa, since you're right next to each other on my screen at least.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I would say for me, sustainability has slowly become both a personal and now a professional lifestyle. I was really impacted recently when I heard a designer say every line that we draw on a piece of paper has a carbon footprint. It has an impact on the well-being of all things on this planet. And it's really shocking when you start to look at the statistics. I think it's something like our industry is tied to about 40% of carbon emissions, and we're responsible for a third of the world's waste. So it's just knowing that every decision that we make as design professionals has such a tremendous impact. And I guess the cool thing about that is we get to be kind of the superheroes of solving this problem. We get to put our capes on because I'm not an accountant, I'm not a dentist. I'm in a role where the decisions that I make day to day have an impact on being part of very tangible solutions. So, it's the decisions that we make every single day that make a big difference in the trajectory of how the story goes. We get to write our own story here.
Gosh, I love that idea that we're all superheroes, and I would say we are definitely a panel of superheroes here today. So, Julio, from your perspective, kind of what is sustainability? What has drawn you to this pathway?
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you for having me. Well, I would like to start when I speak about environmental sustainability for what it doesn't mean to be. And it is not another product line nor a marketing activity, but it's, on the contrary, something that must start from changing yourself and then changing your company and being part of the value of your company. In particular, when we speak about environmental sustainability, and please remember, I'm making synthetic fibers, so theoretically, I'm on the other part of the barricade. It means responsible use of natural resources, zero waste society and manufacturing, and carbon footprint, which of course must respect the global crisis that the climate is bringing to us. So seems easy, but on the other side, it means a lot of work and a big change, of all what we are doing, because basically I am arrived to a kind of position that all what we are doing is wrong. So we must start doing not only less bad, but we have to start doing good. This is what I think.
Yeah, Megumi?
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me here in this panel. And I agree with many of you guys, what's said before, but I think it's our new way of life. Every one of us, right, as a citizens, have a responsibility for our planet we live on. And I think changing our way of life through the lens of sustainability is something that we should think about within the framework or the means we live in. So, maybe demanding less, maybe not purchasing the next Amazon shipment, those are the choices that we can make. As a designer and architect, we have such an opportunity and to influence others through design and architecture. So we have to remind ourselves there's a power that we have to select the building materials and equally important that we understand that this responsibility. So I think that's something that I bring it close to me personally and professionally.
Thank you all. I can definitely hear your passion, right? And I appreciate, Julia, as you were saying, on the other side of the barrier, right? Because we actually need those superheroes on both sides when we start to think about it, right? Because if we're not making products that allow us to create spaces with them, right, then we're not actually changing kind of what we're seeing as practitioners. So I mean, it will lead us to my next question, where we really framed this discussion in a way to reimagine design for a closed loop system, one that's really and definitely reprocessing materials, maximizing those use of waste, right, which some of you spoke to in our opening conversation. So maybe as a leader with Aquafil, what does a closed loop system mean to you? How do you see that importance of it changing in the industry?
Oh, well, closed system, first of all, a definition, because everybody today is circular, is sustainable, is green. It seems that everything has changed, but in reality, I see that very little is changing. And so we need a big, step forward. For me, circularity means virtuous circle that grows without depleting nature. This is my definition of circularity, which can be applied not only to synthetic fibers, but also to natural products, because let's not forget that also when we are consuming natural resources under the form of natural fibers or whatever kind of product, we are causing a damage to the system. So, I still refer to the three pillars that I have spoken short ago, sustainable use of natural resources and the zero waste society and the carbon footprint. And I always remember that we have to change. We cannot continue like that, because if we don't change, you think about ourselves, making synthetic fibers, consuming oil, consuming energy, and of course, having an impact on our environment. We are going to die. It's a matter of when we are going to die, not if we are going to die. So that's the reason why several years ago, we started our process of changing in order really to, how can I say, first of all, being ourselves happier. So when you look at your face in the morning, of course, hopefully if you have slept, enough, and you see yourself very beautiful, you say, well, I'm doing something good, so, and then, of course, a lot of other incredible things that are happening to yourself and to your company if this is going to happen.
Joey, is there anything you would add on to that as a manufacturer that's really beginning to take some of those elements and create products out of them?
Yeah, I think I might be stepping on future questions, so I'll try to keep it light here. But I guess, a circular product or circularity, to Giulio's point, it cannot be whiteboard circular. It cannot be theoretically possible. It cannot be technically recyclable. That's not enough. That is all prerequisite. But there needs to be kind of a total investment, because again, to Giulio's point, we don't have hardly a single stream of material or system in the world that is truly cyclical or circular. And that doesn't mean we can't do it. And it doesn't mean that there aren't examples that we're getting very close. I think Giulio has one. But we have a long way to go, because, for example, we know now that because of technological advancement, partnership, development, the investment, that nylon is fully recyclable. It doesn't mean that we have a great system for getting it back, cleaning it to the quality that it needs to then be put back into the hopper to be generated again, right? So as we think about sustainable design, we think about material reuse, we think about the technical nutrients and that kind of language, right? My contention is that the sustainable design process needs to begin as early and as broadly as possible. It needs to include as many stakeholders as possible, and that putting all of the responsibility on the specifying community or on the manufacturing community or on the suppliers of the manufacturers, none of that will work. And again, that gets me back to that fundamental durability and longevity question. for something to exist in perpetuity and for something to not deplete natural resources, going forward that are non-renewable, we need pretty wholesale investment in that, and we need to respect the kind of planetary boundaries that we're playing with, both on carbon and on raw material, to get there. And I think that's again, to Julio's point, that's where I think most of the time these commitments fall short, is that companies are not respecting that ecological reality that we face, whether it again is climate or whether it's just natural resource depletion. But those are the stakes, and those need to be our design constraints, because those are the ones that ultimately we're going to have to solve for.
Lisa or Megumi, is there anything you would add as designers that are a little bit further down that specifying lane, bringing these products in?
Yeah, for designers and architects to be part of this loop system, and we have specification that we can implement, talking to the reps, making sure that takebacks are happening and it's happening correctly. I think those are part of our participation, that we can be part of this circularity.
Yeah, and specifying products that have EPDs, really being mindful and asking that question when you're picking a product, does this have a EPD? Just like what we were talking about with HPDs, a few years back, that was health product declarations, talking about the material health, the chemical ingredients that go into a product. And EPD is looking at the carbon footprint, because they're different between every product. And right now we're designing towards a linear economy. We're still there. And again, it blows your mind when you reach that point, when you realize every part and piece that goes into a building has a carbon footprint, and it's all of the widgets and finishes and things that get shipped to make that material, the transport of the material, the production of that material. It's all part of that carbon footprint. And on top of that, I love the point that Megumi made, which is kind of like the back end of like looking at closed loop, because a lot of the products we're specifying are engineered to last a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And usually they are on a job for 5 years, maybe 20 years, maybe a little bit more if you're lucky. But then when it reaches the end of life, it spends the next 400 years in a landfill where it slowly breaks down, but it has not so great chemical ingredients. Those leach into our soils, they leach into our waterways. And, so I love the idea of the really creating more of those upcycling strategies, like the take back programs that Megumi mentioned, just so that we can find ways to kind of like keep those materials out of landfill for as long as possible.
If I could support that point real quick, Stacy, Lisa, I think you're exactly right that obviously we have to remember everything comes with a kind of carbon impact, but also left to our own devices, like this system, our kind of architect and design and construction system, everything we put into a building is going to be trash. That's the default, right? Now that should not be the case. That's why we're all here, right? And it does not have to be the case. That's why we're all here. But by default, that's the path. And so I think that takes a tremendous amount of, again, attention and care and some creativity as well to come up with those total investment solutions that are actually going to retain the value of all that material.
Joey, you're absolutely correct. And we are absolutely tiptoeing on some of those latter questions in this one, because, we were speaking about material choices and really what are the systematic approaches that can allow us to have that intention and thoughtful approach to both using and reusing materials more productively over their entire life cycle. So maybe I will pass this to Julio first to kind of really check in on how are you thinking about systematic approaches for using and reusing materials, so that we really can create these hyper productive materials over their entire life cycle. So it's not that we're designing them to last forever and they're landing directly into a landfill.
What is interesting is that until today, materials they did matter because they should have given you the possibilities, of course, to create beautiful products, because if you don't make beautiful products, normally people don't buy them. But also they should be less expensive or, of course, performing. Now everything is changing because you have to start thinking at what is happening at the end, of the life cycle or of the use of a product. So you have to pick the right materials that is, of course, giving durability, because something must last, the longest possible period of time. That the product must be possible to be reused when necessary, repaired, and then finally at the end of life being recycled. And this, of course, it's easy to say, but in reality, very few materials can allow this kind of possibilities. In our case, we have picked nylon 6, because nylon 6 is really performing. It can give long-lasting durability. And we have invented a system, if of course you take back the product and you design it properly, so we really need, involvement of the entire value chain. You can disassemble the products and taking back the nylon and reproducing whatever kind of product forever. And this is possible only to few molecules, and this is making a big difference. So materials will matter more and more in the future, and this will be pivotal to developing and designing new things for the future.
Given how quickly technology is evolving and really changing, can you speak to how this use of materials and how you actually bring new technology as a way to save time, money, resources when we start to think about that whole life cycle of a product?
Well, new technologies, first of all, they request big research and development. In our case, for example, we are not aiming of developing new technologies for inventing new molecules. We simply want to make present molecules, of course, the good ones, not the bad ones that exist, in a different way. A different way means possibly starting from waste. ECONYL is, for example, coming 100% out of waste particularly ugly, like fishing nets, old carpets, plastic scraps, fabric trims that our customers are sending back, as much as possible post-consumer waste streams. So you have to organize, first of all, the take back, which is a kind of nightmare. And then, whatever truck you receive is normally a surprise, and almost never a pleasant surprise, because it's waste, it's trash, it's not gold or valuable raw material. And you have to start disassembling, taking back the nylon fraction. In this case, let me enter into a little bit of technical words. We depolymerize it. So it means we break the bonds of the nylon, returning to one step back in the chemical chain. And then after a proper purification, we can start the process from the very beginning. So we can make the polymer again, and the polymer can be molded into beautiful design products like lamps or tables or chairs or whatever. And of course, can be extruded into fibers that go for making carpet tiles, for making carpets, racks, area racks, or textiles, fashion that are going, to the most luxury and nicest brands in the world, like Prada, Stella McCartney, Burberry, Louis Vuitton, and many, many others. So this is what we are making today.
Joey, I'm going to pass the question to you kind of as you step in as a product maker that is creating these, like having the take back programs. Like, how do you see new technologies playing into your processes?
So I think if I could start this answer with the comment about the systematic approach to material selection, some people on the call may have heard our team talk about the interfaces approach to material evaluation in our own supply chain, which we do based on what we call 3 lenses of health and materials. So that's the carbon footprint and embodied carbon impact of the raw material input, as well as the final product. The human health impact, so the kind of green chemistry, the hazardous substances that may or may not be contained, or how are we mitigating the risk there if we can't avoid them altogether. And then finally, circularity, finally closing the loop, and really fundamentally, that means avoiding, again, going back to Giulio's initial comments, the depletion of non-renewable natural resource. That's like, think about circularity in that way. And now all of a sudden, yes, recycling is a part of that. Starting with waste is a part of that, but so too is using rapidly renewable resources. So too is using, landfill mining or whatever, right? So I think in terms of technology that hopefully we see when we use that approach to develop our kind of current generation of products. We're looking at having launched the first carbon negative EPD values, no offsets included carbon negative product, thanks in large part to the innovation of Aquafil and others actually. But we have much more to do on the systems for either reclamation or reuse. So I think that there needs to be kind of platforming and indexing and kind of encyclopedias of material out there that can be reused. And I think there's a mindset shift we need to have that allows us to see the value contained in what would otherwise be waste or material that is no longer serving its first life purpose, and retain that value, retain it to reuse it, to remanufacture, whatever. And so I think in there's probably untold technologies. But I also think that there's a fundamental kind of, is there a bio-based material or ingredient that will help us achieve some of our directives or objectives or priorities around, in our case, the 3 lenses. And so, for example, to get to a fully realized carbon negative product, we are using naturally derived stored carbon and kind of stuffing that into the product to give us a carbon negative footprint. We keep that locked away in a solid state for a long time. We continue to take that back and remanufacture it. And all of a sudden we have a business model that is starting to, kind of have line of sight to carbon negativity, the more successful that is, which is a kind of different ball game. So who knows what the technology implications of that mindset shift will be.
And it's all moving so quickly sometimes that I feel like it's hard to keep pace, right? As technologies change, materials become better. I turn Lisa and Megumi to you, right? As practicing designers, when you take all of these inputs in, what parameters are you really taking into consideration when you're working at the intersection of sustainability, efficiency, compelling design, commercial durability, all those pieces we have to hold at one time?
I mean, first, you always still need to meet the objectives of the project, right? We're interior designers. There are goals established on a project in terms of the aesthetic delivery, the performance. But it used to be 10 years ago or so, it was a hunting game to find that right perfect intersection between a sustainable specification and one that met the parameters of the project. And that's not the case anymore. You've got amazing, super robust and well-vetted platforms like Mindful Materials, where you can go on there and the information is basically vetted and delivered to you. So that's so appreciated. It no longer needs to be a compromise. I know for me and for a lot of the teams that we work with, I kind of have this 5-point checklist that I mentally go through when I'm working on a project. It's kind of like step 1, be a little bit more considerate of what actually needs to go into a project. Sometimes we overspecify, just like consumers might over purchase. So being a little bit more thoughtful on that end. A lot of times we order 20 material samples when we really don't need 20. We could have probably just ordered 5. And then also really kind of thinking about when you're specifying material, how are you accounting for that closed loop or next life? Sometimes if you're looking at material that can be recycled, that's a really great choice over something that can't be recycled. Really thinking about eliminating waste. Sometimes we're ordering big sheets of material and not giving thought to, like what that pattern repeat's going to be, like curved flooring pattern, 50% of that goes straight into a dumpster at the job site. So, thinking about the waste that we're generating, as we've been saying before, thinking about designing for reuse, using those take back programs, especially for carpet tiles and ceiling tiles, like Megumi said, and looking to the adaptive reuse market for things like furniture. And a bonus item, because I'm so happy that I'm hearing like plant-based technologies are becoming part of the conversation. I think that's the next generation of finishes, because natural materials that are bio-derived are actually carbon sinks. So that's super cool. They're actually pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So I think those are some of the cool process things that we could be doing right now, making a tremendous difference.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the 5-point checklist. That might be something we want to implement here too. But I also want to talk about advocacy in terms of like living future certifications and some of these programs that, I think talking to the rep, really provoking them the question of what they do to make the sort of industry better and how we can specify, how can we improve our practice. And I think this communication really helps among not just within the designers, but talking to the contractors, talking to the reps. And I think these education is part of what we need to more advocate for.
Thank you both. I hear you also mention, right, some of the complexities that can often get in the way when we think about how to do our best work in a sustainable future. And so I'm curious what each of you might think some of the greatest challenges are that get in the way of making sustainable choices. And maybe I'll pass it to Julio first.
Oh, the challenges.
Yeah. What are your challenges, my friend? Because I'm sure we all have different ones.
Well, my challenges, of course, are to find, young talents that are coming and helping me. Because normally I see that young generations are far better than us, and but other than that, the biggest challenge I'm finding today is greenwashing, so I'm so crazy when I hear, people saying stupid things that, it's difficult for me sometimes, to hold and to say, oh, come on, don't get nervous, because really you hear things that are so far from reality. And clearly, the final consumer is not able to understand and cannot understand every single detail of every single product that he or she is buying and consuming. So we really need more responsibility, especially from large companies, that are, believe me, the ones that are maybe, don't want to say cheating more, but, greenwashing more, sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Other challenges that individuals are seeing from their perspectives in their role?
I'll second that. Greenwashing makes me crazy. And it's, not just kind of like slipping these certifications in there, it can be overwhelming. There's over like 600 certifications now. I can totally get that it's overwhelming, but, kind of just sticking to the facts, knowing that the product that you're looking at is well vetted. And that's not just for certifications, like we're hearing that now for things like post-COVID, talking about things like antimicrobials and, that those are additives that are important to put into products. But it's really, a lot of times it's just like a marketing stunt to have them sell one product over another. When you really start to look into it, some of those additive agents are actually causing more harm than good. And there's really little third-party data that says, that's doing what it's saying it's going to do. So again, I'll point to like looking at databases that vet the products for you, like Mindful Materials. It just kind of helps not to make all those certifications so overwhelming.
It's almost like we did too good of a job in convincing people, in the last 2 decades, oh, you do need this finish because it's going to make it more durable. And now we know more, and that it's actually creating more harm than good. Any other thoughts on that one, Megumi? Then maybe
maybe the challenge or maybe a frustration to maybe the speed of things that we, I feel it needs to be changed more faster, and, we taking every step very carefully, which is good. But, sometimes I think speed is necessary. And I think maybe I mentioned it earlier too, but like demanding the transparency, advocacy, and also we are working in a committee on the environment from California. We're challenging the registrations through Cal Green code changes. So implementing embodied carbon reductions, reuse of the building. I mean, talking to our community, sort of not just within the firm, but outside of the firm, and sharing the resources within ourselves and challenging the states and the city to codify sort of the embodied carbon reductions and healthier materials. I think those are one of the things that we designer can do as well.
Yeah, I think like establishing those priorities and how you're going to track them, and even with maybe not in spite of, maybe because of all the movement and success over the last 20 years around transparency, for example, it's actually might be more complicated today than it was in 2005. I think we talk about the business plan to reverse global warming, climate take back at Interface, developed alongside Drawdown, Paul Hawkins' work in 2016, and the number one answer of both climate experts and young professionals to what's standing in the way of kind of fixing this and reversing this trend of global warming climate issues was business as usual. And I actually think if you kind of, again, use that framework, boy, it makes a lot of sense, because sure, there are policy barriers. Sure, there are economic incentive, challenges. We've externalized so many costs that it's really hard to sometimes compete when you make a change. But I think fundamentally, it's about that change. We're not in the fastest moving industry. We're not in the most progressive, creative, community, not the specifiers so much, but the kind of whole, construction and design, pipeline and flow. There's immediate resistance to anything that is not what, we typically do. Even a 5-point checklist, Lisa, like you mentioned, that's a new thing, right? It's clearly a good idea. You want to keep it simple, but I mean, that takes time for you even internally to kind of develop and then begin to practice, much less a single firm, much less a multi-firm, much less the industry as a whole, right? So I think that, that's, again, that kind of gets me back to the idea of trying to build this movement, trying to get people excited about participating. I fundamentally believe we have to drive curiosity and interest rather than try to come back to simple rules that you can always follow, because I just don't know that that's the future of sustainable solutions. That doesn't mean there can't be good rules of thumb, and it doesn't mean that everything has to be kind of handmade from scratch every time. That's not what I'm saying. But how do we kind of drive toward wanting to get people to dig in and learn and make those decisions that they are really proud of and that hit those goals that Megumi you're talking about, whether it's for a municipality or an end user, a corporation or whatever. So I think that the challenge really kind of comes back to that. Any difference, it's hard to prove, no matter how clear it is, that it's a better solution on lots of different axes. It's hard to prove it or get people to go first and try it.
I think that, begs this question of, how are we learning, and kind of how does sustainability and education play into this when we think about both young designers, the early practitioners, or even those of us that are more seniored in our practice that need to learn new things in order to step into the space of doing better in our approach. So maybe Megumi, I'll tee this to you first. How are you seeing sustainable education? I know you're a leader in AI's COPE community, the community and the environment. How are you seeing that play out in your community? Kind of what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think through the COPE, we started to engage with the universities in the local areas. And some of us goes there to give a lecture of what we do in the practice, what's our concerns are, and sharing our thoughts, really engaging the students from professionally and learning what they're learning. I think that's one of the important things that COPE does help to train sort of early train them early to have our mindset, our frustration being shared. And we see many of them very curious, 20 years ago, so where we studied, I think none of these conversations happened, but they are very curious what they can implement. And I think the way they see what's cool in the design or what's beauty, I think that started to change, right? I think that's the early education that we can do to the students. And maybe the design is not anything that just looks cool, but maybe the story that tells is something that is more valuable and that they can present themselves in such a way.
or maybe evolving what we actually think looks cool, and letting that taste kind of embed itself within the sustainability movement as well. Any other thoughts on that one, Lisa?
I think sustainable design is the new benchmark of good design. And it's so exciting to see young, passionate designers that are coming to the table with that as a priority from day one. I think that is absolutely the current state and will be the future of how we define good design. I think there are wonderful resources out there. I know for us at our firm, we allow designers to take classes from Parsons New School. They've got classes on sustainable design, healthy materials. That's well worth checking out. Even if you're paying out of pocket, it's not that expensive. There's so many awesome podcasts out there. Metropolis has a podcast, I believe, as well as there's a great one called Breaking Dishes. I'm sure I'll think of 10 more as when I hang up. I'm happy to try to follow up and share them. But I mean, literally, you could get out there, research. There's so much material out there to learn. A lot of times, even if projects aren't going for LEED and WELL certification, they're amazing resources. IIDA and WELL, if you've not checked it out, looking at their WELL scorecard just as a reference point. It's a super user-friendly format. And, like I said, even if you're not going for the certification, it's a great reference. So the materials are out there. And I know that young designers are super hungry to continue to raise the bar. So I think that's super inspiring.
Thank you. All right, I have one more of our prepared questions before we welcome some questions from our audience. And this I'm gonna tee up to all of you, so be prepared. Considering really our industry's collective efforts, can we design a future that meets people's needs without further degrading nature in the process? In short, can we do better? Maybe I'll start us out with Julio on this one.
Of course, we can do better. We must do better, And what is making me happiest and very happy, because if you think, end of last century, the first crazy people started to think about this revolution. Ray Anderson is one of my greatest heroes. Then I can mention Doug Tompkins, always remaining into the textile industry, and many others. Then, beginning of this century, some people started to join. But lately, people understand that if you go for recycling, you can do by yourself. But if you go for circular, you need the involvement of the entire value chain. So you really have to put together people that are starting designing with people that are starting delivering ingredients and others that are starting assembling and making products, and finally organizing take-back systems that are incredibly complicated. But if you design them properly, they bring you more business, more profit, more people, and more joy. So not only, better business for the future.
Love that. And I love having all components of that specifying with here today as well. So maybe Lisa, what are your thoughts on can we do better?
We have to do better. We are doing better. We will continue to do better because it's the right thing to do. And as designers, we see the impact that we have, just like consumers vote with their dollars, so do we. And we've got really amazing, innovative manufacturers that are here for it. They're making the better products that will become the new normal. And, even for clients that might be kind of late bloomers, have sustainability as part of your agenda when you're kicking a project off. Set those goals, have those conversations, come to the table with the information. And, it's an open dialogue. It's a discussion because we're all in this together. And we vote for a better world with every project that we work on by the decisions that we make.
Megumi, do you want to add?
Yeah. I think maybe the short term in the future, I think reconsidering our demands and needs and reconsidering just sort of a business as usual is something that we really need to tackle on. And maybe the future, longer term, would be innovations. I think Joey mentioned about green chemistries and sort of natural materials that can't be more, we don't have to invest on the synthetics, but maybe more of the natural materials that we can innovate. I think those are the future we want to look into so that we are not dealing from chemicals to begin with. And end of life would be so much easier, and maybe it's long lasting. So I think those are the future that I hope for.
Thanks, Mikumi. Joey, do you want to wrap us up before I pull some questions from our audience?
Sure, I'll try to be quick, but I mean, I think these are all wonderful answers. The answer is absolutely yes. That's not the hard part. We can do better, right? The hard part is, will we do better? And I think, again, we can only do better if people want to. And so I think the challenge for all of us and anybody who kind of cares about this conversation is to say, not only do we provide the solutions, but how do we make them so compelling, so enticing, so joyful, Julia, that people don't even think about it. They would rather do it that way. They would rather go that direction. And I think that is more than possible. It is also more than necessary. It should be something that we all aspire to and drive toward, because I think it's going to bring our industry and commerce and society kind of into a future that is only limited by how we can imagine it being great. And but my evidence for that is we got ourselves here. Nobody did it for us. Earth didn't evolve underneath our feet in a bad way, right? We put ourselves here. So if we put ourselves here, we can definitely put ourselves back or go a different direction. It's just a question of that collective action and desire.
Perfect. All right, so as we step into a few questions that we received before the panel began, I'm gonna, Lisa, maybe ask this one to you. When you think about your work, how can renovation projects really be evaluated to eliminate demo, landfill excess?
Thinking about being a little bit more cognizant of the decisions that we make, during the different phases of the project. And, that little 5-step rundown I gave earlier, I'm just kind of referring back to that and thinking of like examples, when we're kicking a project off. It's so funny because I remember being a young designer, and one of the first steps I would take on any project, I would be scrappy. I'd look at the existing job site. What can I reuse on that existing job site? Where's the plumbing located? Can I put plumbing there again? Is there anything there that I can salvage for reuse? Asking the client that question, do you have anything in your existing inventory that we can refurbish? Furniture that's perfectly good condition, but might need to just be reupholstered. I don't know why we're not doing that anymore. We really should be looking for using what already exists as part of a design solution, rather than assuming everything's getting demoed and is going to be new. Again, turning to the refurbished market, and that's one of the hero value add propositions to a project. A lot of times a client might raise an eyebrow if you're recommending a super sustainable material that might be a little bit more expensive. Adaptive reuse is a total value add, and it's a missed opportunity. If we get in there and we say we're going to specify 100 Aran chairs at $300 a pop rather than 1,000, that's a huge success story. Where are you going to spend that money? On more sustainable design solutions, hopefully. It just needs to be kind of like a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more part of our process. So I think, again, it's all part of the message of circular economy. And I think that's where we get the most bang for our buck.
If I could just add on the renovation side, I think that it's probably more crucial to think about circularity and environmental impact for that quick turn TI. And that is, again, going to require kind of total investment, not only from the specifiers to pick sustainable options, but from the manufacturers and suppliers to provide stuff that makes sense. So, how much do we have that is demountable and reusable? How much do we have that we over-engineer because it is basically designed to be single use, right? And I struggle with this kind of immensely, not only with our own product portfolio, but kind of with the whole concept, right? I like to say this, the thing we love about plastic is it doesn't rot. That's the problem. It lasts, Elisa, to your point, it lasts 700 years, right? So, and at the same time, pretty much all plastic, almost all plastic is technically recyclable. It doesn't usually get recycled, but it is possible, right? So it's like, how do we kind of square those things, right? But that renovation cycle, that interior fit out, those quick turn projects, those office buildings that have 25 tenants over 3 years, like, you know, we that really needs to be addressed. And especially on the embodied carbon side, all we're doing is adding embodied carbon to that building's profile, right? We're not changing the performance of it. So I think it's even that much more critical.
Yeah,
Really the
I don't
idea.
know what much to add to that. But I think as a designer, any, you know, not just the selection of material, but how they put together, designing for disassembly or type of adhesive you pick that is just easier to take it off, or more of water soluble materials, then I think those are something that designers can consider as well. But I think Lisa and Joey covered.
You're absolutely right though, Megumi, right? Because you know, you could specify a wall panel that hangs on a wall with adhesive. And in fact, we probably do that detail every day and don't give it a second thought. What happens at the end of its life? It gets ripped out in parts and pieces, chucked into a dumpster, it goes immediately to landfill. The 30 seconds that somebody drew that detail, they could have mounted that panel with Z-clips. And at some point in time, given a future owner or user the chance to kind of take that off the wall and repurpose it again. But it's kind of like that type of thinking that we just kind of like need to take a moment, you know, that every line on paper idea, like think about it, you know, think about like, how am I or aren't I sending this specification to landfill before it's time?
It's a great question for all of us to ask first. Our role.
You're back, Stacey. We're good.
You were frozen.
At least I think. It's okay.
Maybe if I can get out the second question, we'll see. We had our practitioners were asking about the elevator speech. So I was curious, Julio, kind of what's your elevator speech for the importance of sustainable products?
Ooh, elevator speech. Come on, you know. So I'm Italian, so be a little patient with me. Well, basically, I like all what we have said, and I believe that there are many things that we have to start implementing, not from tomorrow, but from yesterday, you know. And if I can elaborate a little bit, why we love nylon, for example. We love nylon, and especially nylon 6, because it performs, so it can give very good durability, can be perfectly recycled, and now try to make Megumi happy, can also come from plant-based raw materials. So this is again part of the innovation for the future. We must not, in my opinion, develop new molecules, new products, new things that at the end will make returning of materials and of products more difficult. Sorting is the first problem that we have to encounter and to resolve when we are taking back, you know, things at the end of use. You know, but I mean, being able to produce nylon 6 from plant-based raw materials as a primary source, and finally, perfectly recycling it, it gives perfect accountability of raw materials for the planet. So, what I want to say at the end is that we really need to start thinking differently than we have talked until today. Picking the right material for the right application, because I mean, does not exist one single material that can deliver a solution for everything. And of course, collaboration throughout the value chain for designing with the end in mind, I like to say. So designing for remanufacturing. In our case, we have the responsibility to supply solutions and not problems, like, for example, ingredients that can permit to designers to design with monomaterial when possible, or design for disassembly at the end of use, so that we can recover the value of the raw materials and of the ingredients that are inside each product. So this is what, I like to say.
It's an excellent pitch. I would definitely say yes. And I realize we're getting close to the end of our hour, so maybe last question for each of you. In 30 seconds, what are you optimistic about in terms of sustainable design and systems? And maybe we'll start first with Megumi, and then we'll move through the panel.
My name, you said? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic for the future of generations that I think more and more being curious. Like I said, of the college students or younger generations even. But I think the conversation we can have here in the profession is mentoring them, right? I think the younger designers and having those conversations, not only just the materials, but the environmental justice and other sort of sustainability that goes around our industry. And I think talking about these things, I think makes us more positive. Sharing the thoughts are so much more positive than sort of a doom and gloom. So I think that's what I'm really optimistic for our next generation and the engagement with them.
Thank you. How about Lisa?
I'm excited just because, I mean, the trajectory is really promising. There's so many materials and products out there that are trending to innovation and sustainability. At this point, we're not even inviting vendors into our studio to show us products or leave products behind unless, they're there and they're part of that conversation. And additionally, I was really excited that we started this conversation talking about social justice, because that is another part of this conversation that doesn't get said enough. And there are wonderful initiatives like the Design for Freedom program that are well worth checking out. And I really, in addition to getting a lot more of a standard baseline of products that are sustainable, I think that's also going to be incorporated into our day-to-day as a design community.
Thank you. Joey, how about you? And then we'll wrap up with Julia at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question is all, the answer is just in all in how you look at this. We could have been doing an immense amount more over the last 40 to 50 years, and we would not be in the miserable situation we are for this next decade. At the same time, the kind of latent general knowledge about these issues, the commitment, the interest, the recognition, the acceptance is at an all-time high. I mean, I think that's also undeniable. More people know that sustainability matters, more people know that the climate matters, more people know, and they want to be part of solutions in a way that I think we're not giving most people credit for. Because our history has been always to tell them, well, you've been doing everything wrong, let me fix it for you, which turns people off. Right. So again, the more that we can, yeah, exactly. Shocker. The more that we can recognize that this is a mass movement and support it as such and kind of cultivate it as such, I think the possibilities are endless and the positive implications are immense. And that's what I choose to focus on. So whether it's technology, whether it's your role, whether it's how you talk about it, whether it's the materials that we use, all that stuff is going to change and evolve. And we have to recognize that that's a positive thing, that's an exciting thing, and kind of feed that momentum.
Anything you want to add on before we close out?
Well, very quickly, what I like to see is that young generations, they think really differently. I mean, I'm turning 60 shortly. And so you can imagine when I was born and when I was educated, I was not educated with the same principles, with the same mindset, of the young people of today. And this is very important because they have a strong power to influence politicians that have the responsibility to make a legislation that can drive the change. Legislation is a super powerful weapon to start making the change happen much faster than it is happening today. So, and we are seeing, for example, today in European Union, that there are new, we call them directives, that the member states must adopt, thinking about, for example, sustainable textiles before the end of 2030. Because of course, I don't like pledges for 2050, 2060. I mean, you know, we will all not be here, you know, in 30 to 40 years. So we need to see changes happening much quicker than they're happening today.
Thank you. And with that insight, we'll go ahead and close our conversation today. But thank you all for your time and energy on the panel today, and look forward to continued conversations as we all maintain our superhero status as sustainability champions. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.